your understanding for that. Only a quick operational detail. You are all yourself in a position to mute and unmute yourself. When Jorgo is speaking, please mute yourself so we don't have any echo. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand. Can you all see that? It is next, it should be next to your name. And you simply raise your hand and then I will give you the floor. Yes, you can certainly also address your questions in the chat if wished. And last but not least, please note that neither video nor audio recording nor audio transcription are permitted during today's lecture. And that's actually it from my side. Wishing you an interesting lecture, and please use also this opportunity to engage with our expert today and answer your questions. And now give the floor to you, Jorgo.
Thank you very much indeed, Veronica. A warm welcome from my side. Over half of the planet, I'm sending my regards today. It's good to have you here in the ECB virtually. Let me share my presentation with you. You're seeing my emails now. Can you see my slides? Do you see the slide?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Yes, wonderful. Yeah, a warm welcome also to Wiesbaden. I have a close link to Wiesbaden, although I don't live there, but I teach right next to you. University Law School. So you're not the first ones who join us from Wiesbaden, although I understand that you're practically all, at least the students come join us virtually located in China. Address you in, let's say, Mandarin. I will speak English. My name is Jorgo Zaruras. I'm a lawyer in the ECB since quite a long time. I come from the academic sector, so I only joined in 2008. Before that, I was working at the University of Marburg as a assistant professor. And that explains probably why I keep a little bit of a focus on organizational and legal aspects, simply because I was working on these topics for years, and I must also right away forgive the lawyer. Okay, there might be a situation or two. My knowledge in economics is limited, but I try to cover it with legal expertise. So let's have a look. Now, how does this work? Please do interrupt me. I think interaction is good. It's not rude to interrupt the presenter. Not to the contrary, it's positive because it would allow us to sort of exchange views and clarify topics which you might be interested in. Now, this is all about Europe. Europe is quite different in terms of political system, in terms of traditions, in terms of Europe being a supranational organization, not a state. You know, the European Union is not a state, as you know it from China, but rather a conglomerate of individual sovereign states. We'll see later how difficult this can be and how often this leads to need of compromise, which is probably even characteristic for the setup of the European Central Bank, being the central bank of Europe. Now, let's have a look. Now, this is the building which you unfortunately missed to see. If you had made it this year without the Corona crisis to Frankfurt, we would have had the opportunity to show you a little bit around. The colleagues have a wonderful visitor center where you can, you're not allowed to take any money with you, unfortunately, but you will learn a lot of things about Europe, about the European Central Bank, about this spectacular building we normally work in. Now, what is the European Central Bank? The European Central Bank is, first of all, an EU institution. You wonder what EU institutions are. We mentioned already Europe is a supranational organization. That means that we don't have a real government, as you know. But it is some sort of a federation which has not yet made it to a state. It's not comparable to the United States of America. It's not comparable to the Federation of Germany, but it is supranational. It's a legal entity. It is a very close, but not yet. And this body of the European Union has some institutions, some agencies as well, a lot of agencies, far more agencies. We'll see that in a second later, but being an EU institution is the highest level of EU agencies. So it's quite a privilege. And we have some colleagues, and also in Frankfurt, working for the EIOPA, that's the insurance supervisor for Europe, and they're quite jealous if they hear what privileges we have over at the ECB. Now, EU institution, as I mentioned, is quite a privileged thing. The ECB has particular privileges. We are going to look into this a bit later. What does the ECB substantially? Well, first and foremost, it is in charge, responsible for the currency, the euro. You've all heard of it, I guess. This is the currency for most member states of the European Union, not for all of them. We'll see in a second what the differences are. But the ECB is the central bank which is linked to this currency. Okay, like the Fed Board of Governors is linked to the US dollar, like the Bank of England is linked to the UK pound. We are the central bank which is responsible that this project euro works pretty well. There have been some challenges over the past couple of years. You all read it in the newspapers, crisis over here, crisis over there. Now we have the corona crisis, which Europe is trying to deal with, the whole world is trying to deal with. But you know, the latest developments over the past 10 years were quite challenging, and we had to develop new strategies to meet these challenges. It is the central bank of the euro area. And you might wonder, why is it, do you distinguish between Europe and the euro area? The answer for that is that not all of the EU member states, which are sovereign, independent in legal terms, have adopted the euro yet. We'll see later how this looks, but 19 of them are in this exclusive club of the euro area, and these are the countries like Germany, for instance, or Greece or France, where you actually pay in euro. And the group of these countries is called the euro area, and it currently includes 19. The euro area is the inner circle, if I may say. So the euro system is the bigger aspect, and the ECB is probably the most important, or the hub function of the euro system. We'll see later how this is interconnected, but it's all quite atypical for a central bank and a centralized society. Okay, if you go to a normal country, I'm not entirely sure about the Chinese setup, but you would not distinguish between different provinces, whether they do belong to the monetary system or not. This is all a result of the particularities of Europe. What is really important, and which brings everything we just discussed here together, is that the ECB makes and implements monetary policy. Right? This is the main purpose of this whole institution. Some aspects are related to printing and developing banknotes. Other ones are related and mainly related how much money do we push into the financial system, into society. Okay, this in substance, and again, forgive me speaking as a lawyer, I'm trying to translate what I grabbed over the years. This is the essence what it's all about. Okay, it's super complicated, it's super complex, and we have every once in a while economists who either got the Nobel Prize or close to getting it to explain monetary policy aspects in particular. But in a nutshell, this is the broad overview. What is the ECB and what does it do? Now, how did we reach so far? You have to see, and again, this is probably a bit strange if you come from a centralized state like China, to see that it took us quite long. You have to see that the ECB is a very, very young central. It's not 300 years like the Banque de France. It's just 2 decades in substance. And you have to also understand, where did we come from? We roll back now for about 70 years, 75 years, and you have to see, when did the European community start before it became the EU? It started in a post-war situation. Europe had just seen the worst experience in terms of war. It was World War, where half of the continent was destroyed, where a fascist regime was brought to an end, and we find ourselves in the situation where we have to rebuild the continent, also in terms of industrial and financial terms. We have to rebuild society. That means re-establish democracy and trust between the people of Europe, who were fighting each other heavily a few years earlier. And you have to see that the European partners, who are nowadays our best friends, Germany, had to regain trust into Germany as a state, as an economy, and as a partner. And after this horrible experience of World War II, we might have to roll back even a little bit further. One of the reasons why the Nazis could establish themselves in Europe was the reaction of Europe after World War I, ended in 1918, back in the days. And it imposed quite heavy obligations on Germany, because controlling a big part of Germany, for instance, paying reparations, etc. And the burden of these measures probably fired or worked in advance of these dark forces who took advantage of the situation in 1933. Now, after World War II, people think that we should not do exactly the same. One option would have been to bring Germany back on a strictly agricultural level. The aspect was, though not very good in the view of the time, because the Cold War was coming up between USA and Russia. So people say, okay, we need to get Germany back on the track, the international community. At the same time, we need to keep an eye on Germany. That long introduction explains why we already in 1952 established the European Coal and Steel Community. Now, what was that? Steel and coal were the two key industries for the defense sector. Still are, probably more electronic devices these days, but the idea was there. We built a European community. Former enemies, France and Germany, group up together with Italy, who was an ally of the Germans for very long. And we built a community in which we can create synergies, but at the same time we keep an eye on the development and Germany. In the beginning, it was a bit of a trust issue. That's the starting point, 1952. A very small aspect of the economy, that's coal and steel, the heavy. And now we see that this initial control mechanism is not bad, because what we experienced in Germany, and I'm sure that China has this much more evident, was what we call the Pax Romana in the ancient days. That was the prosperity of the Roman Empire, because you could trade your goods over thousands of kilometers without paying any taxes with a single currency, and that led to a certain. And this was one of the inspirations to see, okay, this steel and coal community works quite well. Why don't we extend it? And this is the point in time where the European economic community kicks in, as well as the atomic energy community. Atomic energy, again, was a dual-use product. You could use it in peacetime, but of course you could also create nuclear weapons. So it was another control. And now, 1958, the whole thing starts growing. It gets more and more important because the member states realize that we're doing very well. We don't have to pay tolls. We don't have to pay a lot of taxes. We can start shipping our goods from south of Germany. You can sell your Mercedes to the north of France or to the south of Italy. And so this tiny little plant, which started as a control mechanism, grows bigger and bigger. And imagine this being a progress which had some ups and downs, but steadily walking. Still, we're very far from having a state. Okay, it's a club, but it grows bigger. And 1967 was the point in time where the European communities were established. Okay. Another important point in time was 1993. That was where the European Union, as we substantially know it these days, was established. And this is the point in time where Europe actually got its shape. Now, you see that only in 1998, the European Central Bank was founded. There was something before. There was an institute which dealt and prepared work. But this was a very, very small thing compared to this vast. Europe had to start. And when we back in the, I don't know if you see my mouse, in the beginning, 1952, nobody thought of having a central bank for Europe. The central banking was something a sovereign state did, not a club. But the more we developed, and the more Europe developed, the question of a common currency, a monetary union. And this is what, at the end of the day, led to the system, the European Central Bank, which we are going to look at. That's the whole background. You don't have to remember all the details, but what you should bear in mind is that this is a development which is basically not very linear and had to take a lot of steps, and it's quite different from our central bank that grew and developed in a centralized. It's quite unusual. You know. Any questions so far? Please do interrupt me. Don't be shy. Yes, please.
I have one question. I don't really know how this presentation is going on, but let me ask one question, or just try to get an answer. What we discussed is, and what they didn't understand, not only by Chinese students, also some US, was the Target 2 issue.
Target 2 you mentioned?
What they don't understand is that one central bank, an organization which is still there, Deutsche Bundesbank and others, are at the end of the game this give a credit, a loan to other countries because they don't pay their bills. They don't get this why this is still an issue between the different economies, that let's say there is still a bill open to match and to bring it down to zero, because we talked about the old US system, 17 or 1800X in the Wild West, where they exchange gold from one state to the other. We see this in the movies. To balance the credit. So why does this indirect subvention or loan exist between the different countries due to the unsolved Target 2 issue?
Okay, Target 2 is one project we have in ECB. We have quite a number of them. Don't have a slide on this one, but maybe we can illustrate it a bit better with this map you see over here. Target 2 is, and we have Target 2 securities as well, is something like a transnational system where you shift money from one central bank to the other. And the amount is pretty high. I only know I remember barely the pre-crisis transactions where it was, I think it was in the area of 800 billion euro, 790,000 billion euro per year. And that's quite a lot. And what you have to see that we don't operate the ECB's setup. It is not necessarily the setup of a typical corporation where you have a centralized central bank and branches or subsidiaries, but rather it's like a network and a hub. And you will see in the institutional setup of Target 2 or Target 2 securities as well that it operates under the brand of the family, but the central banks who actually push the buttons and provide the infrastructure are not all the central banks you see here in this map of Europe, but rather the organization is a very particular.
The question was, why are countries not paying their bill due to the other countries like Germany or whoever, or they owe money from other countries via unsolved Target 2 balances?
The balance is one mechanism, and I'm not a Target 2 specialist. It's foreseen in the system that you have balances. So it's not it's like in German we call it Saltierungssystem. That's part of the mechanism, and of course it's not it's a transaction within family members. So this is why you are more flexible and have a higher trust in ECB central banks. That's a fundamental aspect you have to see. Okay, this is how things develop. It's not if you had this with a market participant, you would have to ensure that you have sufficient securities. I would not borrow your money if you were a commercial bank to the same extent as if you were a central bank.
Okay, because we talked this in contact with economically and politically, because what I told is that it is an indirect loan to actually sell our products which are not paid yet. So kind of a parallel credit system which is not public in a way, because they don't understand this. As you said, they have regions or states, and they don't have these secret loans in a way. So that what I always tell, I hope I am right in this, is that this is a kind of a loan or a credit. We accept $1 trillion they owe, for example, us, or they owe France, etc. So I'm right when I say this is kind of that we export our products and we pay it by ourselves. Is this a kind of the right?
From an economic perspective, I do not dare to sort of confirm or contradict this, to be honest, because I'm a lawyer by profession. In legal terms, there are severe differences between a loan and a balancing system. Okay? Because a loan has a different contractual concept, whereas a balancing system is rather an accounting element than a loan in a strict sense. That is the difference. Now, the economic effects which are there, it would certainly be wiser to get one of our brilliant economists. We have tons of them in the ECB to discuss this with you. I don't dare to really get into this discussion because it would not make sense. It would not be true.
Because it has a huge impact on the currency itself, on the euro value.
I'm sure of this, and we are willing and able, as part of our accountability framework, we'll see in a second, to discuss you representing the academia, you representing the European or international public. It's just, I'm afraid I'm not the expert to really give you a qualified.
No problem.
And if I also,
please.
If I may only add here, certainly, Ulrich, you have the opportunity to send an email with exactly that request to info@ecb.europa.eu, and from there, an ECB expert will take it on and share with you what you've just asked.
And it really works because I have answered tons of legal questions from academics and. Good, but thank you very much for your question. It leads me to the next topic on my slide, that Europe, the map of Europe, is probably more colorful than more shades of blue than you would have expected. If you look at the Economic and Monetary Union, you will see that we have different colors here on our slide. They are also reflected on to which extent we conduct the monetary policy. For Europe, you see that not all of Europe is covered because the EU per se does not have cover all countries which are located physically in Europe, which belong physically to Europe. You see, for instance, here a big gap in the middle. That's Switzerland. Switzerland does not belong to the EU, and a few weeks ago, we still had here a beautiful island, which I personally love to go and visit, but which does, in legal terms, no longer belong to the EU. That is United Kingdom, Great Britain, which you all heard about the Brexit, decided to leave the European Union.
You even erased it from the map.
Yeah, well, we had to, because we show you here the map of the Eurozone, respectively, the Euro system, and the colleagues in the Bank of England, or the people of the UK, do no longer belong. You also see that, for instance, Bosnia-Herzegovina is not on the map because they don't belong to our clients, if I may say. Okay. We produce our monetary policy for the countries you see here, color. And you do see that we distinguish between three different countries in this map of you. The dark blue ones are the member states which have already adopted the euro. This is These are the member states where you can only pay in euros. Okay? Ireland, Spain, Italy, Finland, that's the inner circle you mentioned already of the European system of central. That's the euros. And this is what the ECB primarily focuses on when it conducts monetary policy. And you see that also a few light blue member states of the EU are on the map, mainly in the eastern parts of the EU. And you will wonder, why is that the case? Because we have a mechanism for member states of the EU which would like to join the euro. And the system is, we have some convergence criteria, that's some sort of a threshold. You need to jump that high, and if you do so, you're more or less automatically part of the club. So I don't know if you see my mouse, but Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, for instance, joined the euro in the past few years. And they changed their color from light blue to dark blue because they didn't these conditions. And Sweden is a special state, all right, because Sweden theoretically would meet these convergence criteria. They would indeed jump that high. But of change. For the time being, it's not clear. Why does this happen? They didn't really fully apply. For instance, they say, okay, our Riksbank, that's the central bank for Sweden, they do not meet the independence criteria. They expect them to have to join this exclusive. Of course, it would not take much effort to change these criteria, but you see there's a little political level to say, let's wait a little bit longer how things develop. Sweden would just have to push the button more or less and change a few details, then they would make it into the Eurozone. Now, situation is different with regard to this green country. Any idea which country this would be? I know it's difficult to judge this if you didn't come physically. It's Denmark. Denmark, kingdom, a very small country, and before the Brexit, the United Kingdom decided to get a derogation. They have a clause in the treaty establishing the EU, or the functioning of the EU. That's our core legal act of primary union, you could say the constitution of the EU, and they negotiated a clause into this contract, in this agreement, in this treaty, which says that, yeah, we prefer not to join this monetary policy. So the reason for the UK was that the Bank of England, at the end of the day, preferred not to give up its privilege of conducting its own monetary policy. You have to bear in mind that London still is, you see how that develops after the Brexit, the biggest financial marketplace in the world. So they thought, we do not wish to be influenced too much from the Central Europeans and Frankfurt, so we prefer to cook our own little soup. This is history because they left the EU anyway. We are going to stay closely connected because the UK also needs this huge market of the EU. You're Chinese, you have a feeling how important huge markets are, and yeah, UK and the EU will stay closely connected, but from a different angle. And it was already quite expensive to the UK to actually take this step. We'll see how things develop. Brexit, by the way, keeps me as a lawyer very busy. Yesterday evening, I worked till very long because we now have to reorganize a setup where banks could operate freely within the EU, and all of a sudden your structure you build up over the past 30 years, you have to rearrange. You have a branch in Frankfurt, you have a branch in Paris. Which one is going to be the master? Which one is going to be the slave of this organizational setup? So these questions keep me as a lawyer quite busy. What kind of license do I need to operate? Am I allowed to do exactly the same things, or do I have to shift capacities from the City of London to the EU, be it Dublin, which is going to be a new financial player, be it Frankfurt? A lot of banks already announced that they shift business to the EU. This keeps us all very busy, and this also illustrates how flexible and fluent this is. But bear in mind, we have three different categories: those who have made it into the euro, those who will at some stage if they do their homework, and others who decided rather not. Coming back to Copenhagen, to Denmark, they don't do anything completely different from the policy of the ECB, right? They totally depend from an economic perspective on the Eurozone, and it's not they do exactly the opposite. Yeah, please. Ulrich, you have a question.
When we had a discussion with some of our US students who are economically are quite good informed about euro and the consequences for the euro currency, also against the US dollar or the Chinese currency. They ask about why, at the moment, as they see it, only countries want to step in who are actually have a weak economy or expect money to get from the European community, and not like Norway or fully extent Denmark or Sweden, who have a quite solid economical situation.
Well, here we have to distinguish. We'll now look at the map of monetary policy. All right. Yes, sure. We now look at the map of monetary policy. This is not concerning industrial policies, for instance. Right? The map would be slightly different. But at the end of the day, it's a political issue. Because if you come from it from a political perspective, you as a country, maybe also as a candidate country, but let's take Croatia, the youngest member of our family. You do have a strong interest to attract investors. You have a strong interest to get a little bit of sponsoring for building up your infrastructure, for instance. Right? The EU has a huge budget and is pushing a lot of money into the region, and that is something which looks very attractive. But you have to see that these big players, big economic players, first and foremost Germany, then of course France, but also Italy. For them, it's growing markets because you can sell your Porsche, you can sell your Mercedes-Benz, you can sell your Deutsche Bank financial products, Santander financial products, also in Croatia. And it creates some sort of a win-win situation. Of course, this is super political, and of course, you see that countries like let's take this example of Croatia, which was quite enthusiastic after this Yugoslavian war situation in the 90s to be the first one, or one of the first to join to join the EU, also because it needs political stability to. A perfect example is Slovenia, slightly above Croatia, a tiny, little, beautiful little country, but for them it was of paramount importance to get as quickly as possible into the EU because of the political safety. It reduces dramatically the risk of being involved in another civil war, ethnical war, what have you. So that's the aspect. And if you have rather poor, if I may say, reasons of Europe, of course, if you see unemployment rate in northern Bulgaria in the early 2000s, Bulgaria had a vast interest to join the EU because it pushes some money into the country which you would not have. Then you have geopolitical aspects. Okay, the closer, or let me rephrase it, the EU member states who belong to the Eastern Bloc, heavily influenced by the Soviet Union a few decades ago, have of course a strong geopolitical interest to get as close as to the EU, and that means the West, as possible, because it offers you a certain level of protection against political influence from this huge bear of Russia, what used to be the USSR. So there are so many interdependent factors which influence this map of Europe. But coming back to these economical aspects, yes, of course, it provides a lot of advantages. But at the same time, you have to see that you give up a lot of sovereign rights. And speaking as a lawyer, 30 years ago, the Greek crisis would have been different. Why? Because we would have used in Greece a tool, an independent minister of finance, an independent central bank would have used totally different tools than one which is in the EU. Why? Because you see in this map already, you can imagine that the ECB does one single monetary policy, one single interest rate for a group of economies which are, in some cases, entirely different. If you go to the north of Bulgaria and to the south of Germany, you will realize that real estate prices in Munich are I don't know, 30 times higher than real estate prices in some other parts of Europe. But the monetary policy has to be a unique one, problem which also the US sees. Now let me get back quickly to this Greek example. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, in country, a sovereign state which is totally independent would have had the measure of hyperinflation, for instance, to get rid of at least of debt in your own currency. Example to illustrate this: the Reichsbank in Germany in the 1920s had to pay these reparations back to the French who won the World War I. And I remember my grandmother used to tell me when she was a little girl, her father was paid in huge bags of money each day because you sold something and you had to get a lot of money, and next day it would be only half worth it. So you paid a slice of bread for, I don't know, 5 billion Reichsmark. Okay? The purpose of this ultra hyperinflation is to get rid of debt, because then you can say, okay, Mr. Varoufakis, the former Minister of Finance, could say, okay, Wolfgang Schäuble, here's your money back. It's not worth anymore, but officially in legal terms, so this is no longer possible in the EU. It has a lot of pros and cons, okay? But maybe, yeah, to illustrate this, the member states gave a lot of powers and responsibilities to the ECB in terms of monetary policy. And we'll see that later when we come to, should we reach actually the SSM, the banking supervision branch of the ECB, that there are quite a number of countries who do this voluntarily, because they say we so much depend on the Eurozone banking system that it's not worth creating our own infrastructure to supervise this. We outsource this to the European Central Bank. This, the level of complexity is much higher than in a federal state like we have it in the US. Yeah? And there are more possibilities. We see this today. If we look into, let's say, oppositionist states like Hungary or Poland, how much power remains for a smaller economical and political powered member state to influence or stop this machine. In the US, it would be unthinkable that a small, West Virginia blocks the whole budget of Virginia, and Alaska block the entire budget for the entire country. This is difficult to explain or to sell to. Good. Let's get back to this one. I mean, we have a couple of convergence criteria. That was the threshold. We're not getting into the details here. The threshold I mentioned earlier, which these light blue countries have to meet. Say how many debts they have, how is inflation doing. They really need to fit into the overall concept of the monetary union. Why? Because we want to have a homogeneous, let's say, the discrepancies should not be too high, because we do not wish, or it's very complicated to formulate a monetary policy which fits the same needs of Italy and Greece probably as well as it does meet the needs of Luxembourg and Germany. Good. Yeah, let's proceed a little bit because we're quite advanced in terms of time. The ECB is not only a central bank, right? It has this super task of defining monetary policy, but on the other hand, and that makes as an organization the bigger slice of the cake, is banking supervision. We'll see in a moment what that means, but we don't only focus on monetary policy, we also keep an eye on the European banking sector. Yeah, good. Now, what's the context of the ECB being an EU institution? I picked the other EU institutions. You see that it belongs to the Premier League, if I may say, of bodies in the EU. We have the Court of Auditors, we have the European Parliament, we have the European Council. We don't have time to get into the details here. We have the Council, which is not exactly the same, so this is not a typo. We have different levels of influencing the decision-making process in the EU. We have the European Commission, which is the government, if I may say so, of Europe. This is where the money is most of the money is being spent. This is where, by the way, also most of the legal acts are developed. The ECB has own competence to issue legal acts. It's quite a privilege because other EU institutions do not have this privilege. But the European Commission is really big. We have 4,000 staff members. The European Commission is 37,000, if I'm informed correctly. Just to show you, it's a huge animal. And then you have another, 40,000 consultants and trainees and all of that one. Then we have the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the top of the legal decision-making pyramid. And then we have the European Central Bank. And there's a family which is per se on the level of equal. So if you make it into this exclusive club of EU institutions, you're already doing very well. But if you belong to the ECB, you're probably doing even better. Why? Because the ECB as a central bank has a lot of privilege. As a lawyer, I may say that the ECB inherited this from the German central bank. which has many privileges compared to other central banks. The problem here, why would we have independence? First of all, what does independence mean? We don't take any instructions, okay? Projected this Article 130 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, when exercising the powers and carrying out the tasks and duties conferred about the treaties, blah, 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 the ECB may neither take nor a national central bank, nor any member of the decision-making bodies shall seek or take instructions from union institutions, bodies, offices, agencies, governments of member states, or any other body. We do not take instructions. Why? Because we're responsible for monetary policy. It's a technocratic setup. Okay? This is not direct democracy as we know it from resource theory. We take very technical decisions with regard to monetary policy, and our legal setup allows us not to receive restrictions. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, on the top peak of the financial crisis, you had very huge different political interests. So imagine if Dr. Schäuble, the Minister of Finance of Germany, would call Mr. Draghi and tell him, look, you have to do this and this. Increase the interest rate. Or don't buy any Greek government bonds for these reasons. And then you would have Mr. Varoufakis, who would tell you, we need would call, he was a former extreme former Minister of Finance of Greece and a professor of economics, and he had some totally different theories about how the Greek crisis should be. And in such a situation, you would tell to any of these gentlemen, thanks, I heard what you said, I take note of it, but I'm sorry I don't take instructions, all right? I'm listening to what you have to say, but the decision is being taken in our decision-making. And this is to illustrate how important independence is, because you do not wish that industry players, politicians influence or instruct the ECB to do take either route. It's a strictly technocratical decision, and we have our decision-making processes which ensure that the member states or the central banks representing the member states of something. Well, we have an institutional, not getting into the details here, but we have an institutional independence. That means that we don't take instructions. We have a functional, my PowerPoint is no longer working. We have a financial independence. That means that we have a budget. We do not depend on the parliament telling us how much money we get and punishing us, for instance, for decisions we took. We have a personal independence, a special status, which is to some extent comparable to those of a diplomat. Our political leaders, the executive board members, do have the level of a diplomat, so they travel freely. Their luggage cannot be checked by border controls, what have you. And of course, we have a functional independence. That means that our monetary policy may not be influenced by other policy instruments, for instance, taxes. So the ECB, to a large extent, is excluded from taxes being paid in Germany due to its status as an EU institution. Now that raises the question, is the ECB probably too independent? Because if you're super independent, you're something like, these absolute kings we had in the 17th century in France, Louis XVI, Louis XIV, probably more. And we see that independence is good as a society, but being overly independent is probably not too good. That's why we have accountability as a major principle to balance this independence. Now, the philosophy is here that independence has to be mirrored by accountability. Okay? The more rights you have, the more you need to explain. Okay, the ECB does not take instructions, but it has to explain what it did. It's not that President Draghi, President Lagarde, President Trichet just take a decision behind closed doors. Well, they are behind closed doors, obviously. But it's not that they would not explain. We have several forms of accountability. First and foremost, political accountability. That means that President Lagarde, but also and Andrea Enria, the chair, the boss of the banking supervision branch of the ECB, they are invited to the Eurogroup, representing the governments, and to the European Parliament. And these are almost interrogations. You can watch them on television. There was one reason. And there you have the members of Parliament, for instance, asking very direct questions. I mean, you're really surprised. I had to prepare the answers for some of these questions, and you can be sure that these questions are really direct. It's not like what's your favorite dessert, Madame Lagarde, and how do you like Frankfurt? It's really at the core of monetary policy. Or Greek oppositionists, you can imagine that the questions that the Greek opposition asked President Draghi a few years ago were not the nicest. Still, she, Madame Lagarde, have to answer this question because we are accountable. Explain what we did. We have a public accountability. This is, as Veronica already mentioned earlier, aid towards European citizens. We have a huge team in the ECB, which is in charge of answering your questions. Okay? Chinese are also invited to ask questions. And they are very well organized within hours. This question would be forwarded to the business area which has the competences to answer this question. And of course we have the media. The media chases us because they are the fourth power in a democratic society. Media has a right and a moral, if I may say so, obligation to question, is this really okay what you do? Is it okay to push bazillions of euro into the marketplace to sort of face the challenges of the corona crisis? And then, it's my favorite part of accountability, you have judicial accountability. In the EU, you can sue anyone at any time for anything. Okay? It's not even as expensive as it is in the US. So what we face a lot is that people who do not like our decisions, and there are plenty of things which are not very pleasant when you create a monetary policy, or in the area of banking supervision, if we ask a specific bank to increase their own capital, that means that they can pay it out to their shareholders. And or if you take a measure with regard to money laundering, this is also a development. Now, anyone can sue us, and we sue quite a lot, I must say. There was this one spectacular case where the German Constitutional Court, which is actually not really in charge to assess the legality of the ECB's measures, said, no, you went beyond your competencies and you exceeded this proportionality. Right? I'm not getting into the details here. We could spend another 5 hours discussing the judicial accountability and the relation between the European Court of Justice and national course, very interesting, but you give me a call if you start writing a PhD thesis. This is today's session. Now, how does the decision making work? We have the motto here is we have a centralized decision making with a local implementation. How, which area does this affect? You have to see that the ECB is something like a weird construction, because we have on top of the holding of a group of companies the European Central Bank, and then you have below, I use my fingers to illustrate it, the national central banks like the Bundesbank in Germany, or the Banque de France in France, and the national competent authorities which are in charge of banking supervision. And they sort of implement the policy decisions being taken in Frankfurt on a national level in Greece. At the same time, if you look who owns the ECB, then you see that this is something like a holding which is being owned by its own subsidiaries, because the Bundesbank has 19-point-something% of the shares of the ECB, whereas small economies like, I don't know, Malta could be 0.2% of the shares of the ECB. This is to reflect the importance, the economic importance, because it's natural that a tiny island, beautiful island like Malta, I recommend you after the Corona crisis, once this thing is over, to really fly to Europe and enjoy the variety of things you can see. Actually, I'm the only member of my family who hasn't made it yet to China. All the others have either studied in China or went there on vacation, but it's definitely on my list. So it's important also from a cultural point of view to exchange and come and visit Fresenius. Now, let's get back to the topic. Definition of price stability. What does price stability mean? You have to see that price stability is our main task. We want to keep things stable. It should not be ups and downs, because I'm not an economist, but what I understood from my colleagues is this is not good for the economy. Stability is good. Okay? How do you assess it? Harmonized index of consumer prices is very important, and we belong to the few central banks which gave a commitment action. Okay, our big bosses, the governing council, top of our decision-making pyramid, made a commitment a few years ago and said price stability for us means that we keep inflation, which is the measuring tool for price stability, below but close to 2%. Okay, somewhere in the area. This is good for stability now. Given the difficulties we faced in the past, in our very short history, it was not always easy to achieve this, but it's definitely, let's say, we have defined such a goal, and we do our best, our political leaders do our best to achieve this goal. You don't have this very often. As I mentioned, in other central banks and other different financial circumstances would not agree on such a 2%. Yeah, why? I'm not an economist, so and I see the time's almost up. It was identified as a good, if not ideal, level to establish price stability for the Eurozone. I'm skipping these tasks maybe because we have to come to an end. Let's have a quick overview over the tasks of the ECB. What does it deal with? I refer to the legal sources, but not getting into the details here. First and foremost, the tasks of the ECB are defining and implementing monetary policy. Right? Discussed it earlier. It's about price stability. This is our main task. This is the most important thing. Then we conduct foreign exchange operations. Okay, we interact with other central banks, for instance in China or the US. You have to see one thing, that central banks are not competitors. Okay? Huge commercial banks are competitive because they are keen on reinvesting your money, your deposit. But central banks mainly have economic tasks. They have other tasks. They have to take care of price stability, that things don't go up and down like the slopes in the Austrian Alps. And in order to achieve this, they have to conduct also exchange, foreign exchange. What else do? They hold and they manage the reserves of member states. It means that Mr. Varoufakis, we mentioned earlier, was not able to just sell Greece's gold or balance it with claims of Greece against Germany since World War II reparation plan. This is detached from the ministers of finance possibility. Because of this, it's an aspect of this independence. Now, you Ulrich mentioned earlier Target 2 securities. We promote and operate. We operate payment systems by ourselves, plus we do the oversight for commercial or third-party payment systems. In the area of fintech, this is a growing business because we see more and more alternative products which go beyond what we have in SEPA transactions or typical credit card business. We have new challenges here. We keep an eye on the market developments, and we have it definitely on the list of things we want to do and to achieve. Now, 20 years ago, people perceived the ECB mainly as the issuer of banks. Okay? In 2002, when the euro was introduced as a banknote and as coins, this was maybe the 90% perception. People were asked what is the ECB, and they said, those are the ones with the new banknotes we just saw. And but the people's understanding, especially due to these crises we saw in the past years, changed over the years. So banknotes is still important. It's also psychologically important because the reputation of the central bank, we have some psychological research in that regard, severely depends on the perception of its currency. The currency looks cheap, maybe smells awfully if you use a lot of plastic fibers. In hot countries, you have the problem that it starts smelling the money. If you have safety features, this is all very relevant for the perception of a currency and whether it's a strong one or weak one. What else do we have? Contribution to financial stability and supervision. Again, another topic which in 2004, when I first joined the ECB, that was just on a short-term basis. In the old days, it was a small group and it was theoretical financial stability. One final. And this aspect increased dramatically based on this Article 127 on the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. We established this single supervisory mechanism. I'm afraid we don't have the time to really look into this, but it's a huge thing. You take the 114 biggest banks of Europe, and we take experts from all over Europe and detach these big banks from national interest, the supervision over these. So what we do is a Spanish bank should not be supervised by the Spanish supervisor, because you have a certain risk that they would only look into their domestic problems or challenges, whereas probably ignore the impact this might have on the Portuguese or a German bank which is active in other EU countries. So we had a globalization push in the 90s and the following years, we have at least on a European level operating banks, if not global European banks, but the supervisors were domestic. They were put in legal. This is what we try to detach. It's part of the European banking union. I'm not getting into the details here. Just to illustrate you this, how important this is. If you have a Greek bank, it will not, the chief supervisor of a Greek bank will not be a Greek citizen. Okay? If you have a German bank, it's not going to be a German citizen. It's going to be, in case we have one big German bank where Greek supervises a German, the boss of this supervision. Why? Because you want to detach this from national, because the credibility is higher in the market if you say, okay, we want, after this 2008 financial crisis, we want to establish strict rules, credible rules, and the international community, but especially the European community, should trust the European banking system. And this is why we are probably stricter than many other third countries. Being strict increases trust, and the financial system is mainly based on trust. Okay, that's the key feature. Now, this is the aspect which was at the beginning a very small plant, but now it's become a forest. We love figures and statistics. I'm half Greek and a lawyer, so I hate statistics. Okay, I don't care about them most of the time. But for such an economically driven system of institutions, having the right figures and comparable figures is, of course, very important. This is why we have a whole Director General. And then we have international and European corporations. For instance, we cooperate a lot with future candidate states. So if we spoke about former Yugoslavia, if, for instance, Montenegro or Kosovo try to join the EU at some stage, which might take a few more years, but they prepare the legal system and the banking supervision and the central bank setup, they sort of consult us. We plan to do this and this. Would this be in line with what you guys have over there in Europe? Because we want to be prepared one fine day to join and meet the requirement. In a nutshell, this is what international European is about. And of course, this little event today is also a part of international cooperation, because we like the exchange also with students, but also with colleagues from Asia. There's a lot of interaction with the Chinese Central and the ECB. I think this is a good point in time. I have a few more slides, but I did put a little bit of emphasis to explain why these European particularities exist. It's probably difficult to understand if you did not grow up here in Europe. I would now open up the floor for questions you might have. I see Ulrich is already taking a few notes. Maybe you have another question to ask, Ulrich. If not, Veronica, maybe you have received any questions. I'm happy to discuss them.
So in the chat, we currently have no questions. However, please, now is the time to also unmute yourself. If you have a question, Jorgo is happy to answer and to give you some insight.
Don't be shy. There are no wrong questions.
Oh.
The only one who should be scared is me, because sometimes the questions are too technical, I simply can't answer them, but I'm more than happy to discuss them with my glasses.
Ladies, any questions?
which is also fine.
Yeah, it is. It is difficult for them.
It's fine.
Very good. I got you. Yes. It's you, eh?
It's okay, and it is very interesting to know more about that.
Any questions?
No, now so many information to digest.
Yes, we will. We will bring some issues during our lesson today and discuss something, especially compared with your systems and capabilities you have in China. We do not have yet. Everything fine?
So it seems that there is no question right now. I'm quite certain that Jorgo provided you with some information that will give you opportunity to discuss and opportunity to also compare, as you just mentioned. The only thing that's left now is I would like to thank you, Jorgo, for having the time, for taking the time, and for sharing all of that information with us, with the students. And yes, it was great having you. Only as an information to you also, Ulrich, and to the students, we will later on also send you a short feedback questionnaire because we are happy to receive your input on today's event. It was great having you. And yes, all that's remaining to say is wishing you a very nice day and keep the discussion going.
And good luck for the studies. I'm sure Ulrich is going to only ask fair questions for the final exams. Right?
Ulrich, we can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much from our side. And Giorgio and Veronica, thanks a lot. And you can imagine that it is not very easy to follow everything for my Chinese students, but nevertheless, it's very important for them, and of course for me too, to get a feeling and the kind of direct input and see people and understand the organizations more or less. And we will definitely discuss the ECB connected with the the lady is coming. The ECB connected with the political issue, of course, which is also very interesting for my Chinese. If you imagine that all of my students in China still have a must in reading Marx and Feuerbach in school. So, of course, we need to get this in mind. And so they don't know target 2, they don't know the control systems internally. They have an independency of regions, which a region is as big as 3 European countries. You know this best, or the whole EU. So it's always very interesting to fit the information in the different systems. For that, thank you very much. Thank you very much, really. I appreciate, we appreciate that you took your time, and sorry for our helplessness regarding the WebEx system, etc. And we didn't do our homework, I would say, correctly. So thanks a lot again. Have a nice Christmas, nice holiday. especially at home. We all are at home. I see probably your organization also up to 90%. I don't know. Yeah, have fun with your daughter, Georgia. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Goodbye.